Hey folks, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Siadhal, in case you don't know, I'm one of the co-founders at Metaview. Really excited to welcome you to this event where we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to spend a little bit of time really zeroing in on what we see as essentially the most crucial relationship in recruiting, which is the relationship, the ceremonies, the expectations, the chemistry between that of a recruiting leader and the business or engineering leader that they work with. So anyone that's been involved in talent acquisition or hiring knows how vital this relationship is between especially engineering and TA, yet it's also really underexplored. And that doesn't make any sense because hiring is a cross-functional team sport. So today, delighted to have Blake Stockman, whose resume is almost so good that it seems fake, to be honest with you, Blake. So running engineering at Flexport, Uber, Scale AI, been involved at Meta, at Google, and most recently working with YC's portfolio to help them build world-class recruiting processes from the ground up. He's just started his own thing. So he's founding partner at Straightforward Recruiting. You can check them out over at sfrecruiting.io. And yeah, looking forward to getting started. Before we dive in and sort of almost hand the mic to Blake, just a couple of things from a housekeeping perspective. Not only have we got an awesome guest, we've also got some awesome attendees, engineering and talent recruiting leaders from some of the most forward-thinking companies on the planet. We will have some time for questions at the end. So if you have a question, you've got a couple of options. One is you can add it to the Q&A section on Zoom if you'd rather sort of log it and we can come to it later. The other is at the end of the session, we'll give folks a chance to sort of ask it live. So you can sort of virtually raise your hand when the time is right. Please try and keep the questions relevant to the topic, which, as hopefully I've made clear, is all about the tactics, sort of pragmatic tactics for creating an environment where the collaboration between recruiting and engineering is high quality. That's what we're going to be talking about. Let's try and keep the questions focused on that topic. So that's the intro. First of all, Blake, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it. Do you want to kick off? Maybe I know I've sort of given you a bit of a intro already, but it would be great to hear in your own words just a bit about your background and your career so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it. You know, I've been doing technical recruiting for almost 10 years now. Started off in big companies, have found myself going smaller and smaller just because you get to have like much more organic relationships with people you hire, people that you work with, that you're supporting, and it can also get really creative and do a lot of like fun things and make a lot of mistakes along the way. So yeah, just excited to jump in and chat and share.
Nice. You mentioned it there. You've sort of had a first-hand seat, front row seat at impressive list of companies, as you say, from really on the high end to sort of increasingly smaller folks. Are there certain sort of commonalities in the hiring process between those companies that you think help enable them to be successful despite being of these sort of different sizes?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because like when you look at like Google or Meta, right? Like those processes are historically so slow. I remember like one of my hires, it actually took like 6 months from like a few months into my like time there to like right before I left. I was like still trying to like get this guy through the whole process and hired. So yes, there are commonalities, but I think there's exceptions to every rule. I think like the key things in particular with like startups and companies that don't have these, you know, monumental brands like Google and Facebook and do is probably like urgency and just like scrappiness and like willing to like try new things. I think also, you know, trying to not just like drag and drop your own solutions. Like a lot of the best firms and companies that I've worked with like have like a really high amount of data and like importance for data in their organization, and they build everything based on like what they're seeing, right? So like as they experiment, they track, they look at the data, and like that's how they figure out like what works for their mold and how they think about growing their organization. So those are probably like the key similarities.
Yeah, super interesting. I always think there's this everyone's really attracted, as they should be, to this first principles thinking and really reacting to what you're seeing, but equally you don't want to make every mistake that every other company has made and learn from first principles. Oh, that's why that doesn't work. So that sort of balance between first principles and best practice is always a super interesting super interesting balance to strike. I don't think there's any like great answer to it. I think you need to see the reps to sort of understand what's likely to work in this scenario, and also while staying open-minded. Thinking about, I guess, the other side of that coin, what have you seen sort of hold organizations back from scaling strong engineering or technical teams?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Flexport, I think, is a really good example. When I started there, they had like just raised their Series C. And I don't want to like put them on blast. It's an amazing organization, but like they were closing, I think, somewhere in like the 10 to 15% of their engineering offers, which when you do the math, it actually takes them like basically like the amount of engineering time it takes is like almost a year worth of engineering time between all the interviewing and closing and everything. And so I think a lot of the mistakes that these companies come into is they just like don't know how to build like a good engineering brand. Maybe they're expecting to hire a certain caliber of person, but then not paying accordingly. Again, like not being like super data driven with like the caliber of talent they're looking to bring in. And I think like the other key thing is like speed. That's where startups really have that extra edge. You can move really quickly and make a hire in a week or two, if you're a small organization and people are easily accessible. Where, at Google, it's just like, it'll take you a week just to schedule like a phone screen, so there's just so many stakeholders and so much happening. And if you can get someone an offer and sell them on why they're excited, like that's how you like win those like really competitive situations.
Yeah. Just double clicking on that specifically then, what have you seen work well for, I guess, getting folks to a position where they are so ready to adapt and sort of run the interview this afternoon or tomorrow instead of next week? Is it just like a numbers game? You need more interviewers that you trust, or is it an attitudinal thing, some mix of the two?
Well, certainly like more interviewers is always helpful, right? I think having like a culture of hiring is really important. So leading back to Uber, Travis, for all his faults and interesting leadership styles, like one thing that he really did was like all the teams and leaders are responsible for growing their own organizations. Like it is built into their metrics and their performance. And so as a result, like they built it into the cultures of their teams, that like interviewing is really important. Helping the organization grow is really important, and that like we will not achieve what we need to unless we're all committed to like scaling the team. Like that is almost as important as shipping code. And so once you build it into the DNA and culture of the organization and of the teams that you're building, you're actually able to lean on people, and people are more willing to help because they know that it's like, even if for selfish reasons, like they are being like graded and reported on it. Ideally, you have it that like people are just excited to help and like want to jump in, which is the culture you want at a startup and in any company, really. But if you build it into the DNA and like from the top level down that it's important, then it'll be much, much easier to like make those movements and make things happen.
Yeah. What is the because I guess there are like tons of hyper successful companies that took the other path, right? Which is more like centralized hiring to bench, and then hiring managers sort of find someone within that pool. When does one make sense? Like, is there like have you seen one work really well in certain situations, or is it really just sort of again, like a cultural thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at organizations like Amazon, right, like one of the most successful companies in the world, their model is very embedded, where like their recruiters work very specifically with like those teams and those organizations. And on the inverse side, Google, and at least for the most part, and this may have changed a lot since my time there, it's been almost a decade, but like theirs is very centralized. So I don't think that there's like one model that works for everyone. I think for startups, because so much of the selling point is who you're working with, and you really want to like be able to experiment to figure out what is your story as an organization. It's really important to embed your recruiters really, really tightly with their hiring leaders. So they can almost like have that rapid iteration, less stakeholders, less people standing in the way of like making decisions and trying things. So that's I think that like if I had a default, like you should do this model for startups 100% of the time, like a non-centralized model. But then as you scale, you start to come into like different problems and different priorities that like you deal with when you get there.
And like speaking of Uber, obviously, and Amazon, I guess where it started really was Amazon. I feel like the sort of the third way is that bar raiser approach, right? Okay, sort of verticalized hiring, you're responsible for building your team, but we are going to have these bar raisers who are this horizontal across the company that are at least going to have like some line of sight on the candidate, which means we're sort of keeping the bar high across the company and not sort of, I don't know, like maybe over empowering certain HMs if they're not great at hiring.
Well, one of the problems when you so this is something like the bar raiser definitely solves this problem, but like one of the problems when you have like a hyper embedded team is that you can start to get isolated hiring bars within different organizations, which then causes transfers, like internal transfers become a problem because other teams don't trust the caliber of engineer on other teams. So like that's where like the bar raiser really comes in to like solve those. But like when you're getting there, like then like, oh, our company is like large, it's not like existential crisis to hire a few more people. But yeah, they're really, really interesting problems where these recruiting systems start to break down when you reach scale, for sure.
Yeah. Nice. Let's keep moving. So maybe let's jump into the deep dive on these relationships now. This sort of specifically, I guess, between yourself as a recruiting leader, the recruiters that you worked with, and the HMs, the hiring managers, and the engineering leaders, sort of that were your counterparts. What for you are the telltale signs of a strong partnership between recruiting and hiring managers?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always really enjoyed, like when I felt like I've been in a really good groove with hiring leaders that I've been working with, is that they're just like default yes whenever I like ask them for something. And that takes a long time. And I think trust is something that you have to really build with a lot of these engineering leaders, because they probably almost certainly have been burned by recruiters in the past. It's just a highly variable field. So, if you can get to a place where when you ask your hiring manager for something, they know that it's coming from a place of like need and that you've already thought it through. That to me is like the best sign that like things are flowing, Yeah. It takes a lot to get there. And I'm sure we'll cover that like later on in the talk, but I think that that's like the number one. I think like, if I'm trying to think of like a few others, yeah, I think like, I'm gonna harp on this probably a lot today, but like being really data driven, like where there, people aren't just going like, I feel, or I think we should do this, but being like, hey, like using these shared sources of data that we all trust, like this is what I think we should do. And you can have these like really principled, like interesting discussions.
And just so I understand fully, what you're talking about is, of course, as the recruiting sort of person in this situation, bringing data to the equation, but sort of the sign that the relationship is there is that the hiring teams are also sort of familiar and fluent with this data as well. Is that what it is?
Yes. Right? Yeah. You don't want to come in and be like, look at this data I pulled, and then like you're just like glossed over. So like, well, what does all this mean? Like ideally you're in a regular cadence, you're like reporting back, like they're very clear on like your operation and how you're running it. Like they're looking at the metrics that you're looking at and optimizing for, and like everyone's on the same page. That way, when that ask comes where it's like, hey, we need to like bring on another sourcer, or we need to like rethink about how we're doing interviewing. They're like, yeah, I get it. You probably have already looked at this data and like, that makes sense. Like, let's do it.
Yeah. You just like, I guess, remove a few sort of like round trips, right? If people can speak the same language and you have that trust, then you quicker decision making. And I think no matter the macro environment, velocity in business is like the most important thing, and that just helps with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe like an obvious question, but probably worth spelling out. Like, why, in your words, in your mind, is this relationship important? Like, what good happens when you have a good relationship with the hiring manager and the hiring team?
Yeah, well, recruiting is like fundamentally a partnership function, right? And there is very little that you can do if you do not have a healthy relationship with who you're hiring for. That comes with knowing what they're looking for. It comes with helping guide them on decision making. It comes with representing them well when you talk to candidates. Like people are not dumb. If you're talking to someone and trying to sell them on an opportunity and you're not excited about it, like it'll come across. And so I think like literally every element of a recruiter's workflow it all comes down to like, you are an extension of the teams you're hiring for. And so if you could have and develop a really good relationship, it is like the number one thing that you can do in order to like enable your own success.
Yeah.
So I think like everything else aside, like if you have a good partnership with your hiring leader, most other things are solvable.
Yeah, I think that's a really that we're seeing that as a bit of a recurring theme as well, where of course when sort of like the first answer to the question usually around what's the sort of the real KPI for a recruiter, often it's around, well, hiring great people, which of course is true. But if you really sort of dig in that conversation, a lot of the time you find that it's actually the quality of the partnership with the hiring manager, the hiring function that's key. Because sometimes those hiring leaders are satisfied, maybe not sort of as happy as they could be, but satisfied enough that they didn't hire anyone because they feel happy that they didn't also sort of let people in who weren't a fit. And you can't put that on a spreadsheet of did we hit our head count or not, right? There might have been some good no's in there. So I think the sort of the not the poorest, but sort of a slightly backwards hiring relationship that we sometimes see is where it's the recruiter's job to get butts in seats. The hiring managers get in the way of that because they say no sometimes, which is like exactly not the point, right? It's you have the same goal.
Yeah. I think that there's like one example I'll give that has happened like a couple times, like when you have a really good relationship with your hiring leader, you want them to be successful. And so, as a recruiter, really what you're primarily valued, like your performance is on your numbers, right? Like, did I deliver the number of hires that we needed to? So like when you're sitting in like a debrief conversation or like any sort of like hiring decision meeting, and the hiring manager asks your opinion, like, Blake, what do you think? Like, what do you think we should do? And if you say like, oh, I don't know if we should hire this person because of like X and Y reason, and those are valid reasons. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's like you're really worried about how they're thinking about the job search or whatever, like that is like a telltale sign of like a really good partnership. Or on the inverse, if you're like, I actually disagree, I think you should make this hire, here's why, and you're a part of that discussion and decision-making process, that's like a sign of true partnership because you have their best interests in mind, and they like know that and trust that like from you. So that's the flow state.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you do just again, I don't want to over wrap ourselves around the axle of this point too much, but I think you also get this sort of scenario where it can be really attractive for folks in recruiting to sort of almost be the champion for the candidate. Like, hey, I've got them here, I'm getting them through the process, and my goal is to get a yes for this person. Which again is like, I think there are ways to go about that can be successful too, but it doesn't sound like it's what you sort of are recommending essentially.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. Cool. So let's go into the how, I guess. How do you go about building these great relationships, right? Are there some ceremonies or rituals that you recommend having, or is it, anything else you want to sort of tease at?
Yeah, I don't think it's rocket science, like I think a lot of it is just like consistency and transparency. I'm going to harp on data. Like, again, like if you can build a really good recruiting system and you operationalize how you and your team are using, say, like your applicant tracking system and your recruiting software, then you get these really robust data sources where you can understand like what's happening at a very granular level. And then if you're like reporting back on like, hey, here's the metrics, here's what we noticed this week, here's how we're thinking about moving forward, here's our action plan, here's our ask like of you in particular. And if you can do that on like a weekly basis where it gets to the point where people like, oh, there it is, reading it, yes, that makes sense, and then just like trust you to do your job, like that's kind of like where you want to get to, where people just like see you as the subject matter expert for your field recruiting, and like things are just flowing. So the routine, I think, is really around like regular reporting or even building out like real-time dashboards that are actually pulling real data that people can go and like tweak and look at like with themselves. And just like regular sync ups, and like being really involved like in that decision-making process.
Yeah. What are sort of the, obviously I'm sure there's like a degree of, it can differ per company, but what are the sort of those standard recruiting metrics that you would sort of be talking about with your hiring leaders?
Yeah, for sure. I think like understanding how long it takes for you to hire an individual person, like a time to hire, is like a really relevant metric. I think looking at your pass-through rates. So if you look at, okay, I have 100 candidates, I need to make X number of hires. Let's pass them through our process and like see what actually comes out the other end. So understanding your pass-through rates is really important. And I think to like double down on that in particular, if you can look at how you're performing over the last 90 days versus your historical numbers. So, for the last 3 years, these have been our historical pass-through rates. In the last 90 days, we've seen a downtick in our pass-through rate for phone screens. And then you can look at that and you can start to like go look at data. Like, are we starting to like interview more harshly? Or did we change what questions we're asking? Are we as recruiters sending through shittier candidates? Like, do we need to like look at the quality bar? And so you can start to like diagnose a lot of those things and make fixes.
Yeah.
If you look at historical performance versus like recent performance. Accept rate is obviously a clear thing.
Yeah.
And then one metric I really like to do is you can take all of the candidates that are currently in your system and you can project forward. So then you start to get into like forward thinking, where you can say, okay, we have X number of candidates at all these stages. Looking at our performance on like pass-through rate, how many hires are we going to make over the next 90 days with like who we're currently in touch with?
Yeah.
And then that will give you a really good sense of like how much activity you need to do on sourcing, how many new candidates you need to generate so that you can stay on goal and really like make sure that your operation is like charging like towards something.
Yeah.
That's where things can get like really, really interesting, like this forward thinking process. Since so many recruiting teams are like reactive,
Yeah.
that if you can do even like the basic elements of proactive like action, it'll just like make everyone's life like a lot better.
Yeah.
So that's something I recommend to folks that have like that are ready to start to like take on that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think the thing that you spoke about that really resonated among many things with me was this regular or even real-time nature of reporting. And I think one of the reasons that's so important in recruiting is because I sort of often come at things from almost a product perspective. That's my background. Blake and I overlapped at Uber. I was on the product team there at the time, and of course you have these same dashboards. You have this real-time data. One of the things that's constant in product is the product. The product, of course, you might iterate on it, but fundamentally, you have complete control over the product. If you think about that for recruiting, not only are the candidates you're bringing into the process changing, because you can't recruit the same people over and over again. We're all unique snowflakes in that way, but also the people who are changing. So sort of just taking snapshots doesn't really work. It has to be regular because, yeah, as I say, if you're having interviewers who are doing a worse job or sources who are bringing a different quality of candidate, that can happen irrespective of almost like all of the good work you've done before. So yeah, that regularity of reporting I think is super key. And yeah, the way you explained it just sort of hit different that time. You mentioned as well like regular syncs. Do you keep it quite ad hoc, or do you like to actually have sort of more ceremonial, like, hey, we have this weekly meeting, we cover these things, and once per month we do this instead? Or yeah, how do you think about running that type of the relationship from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has changed a lot since my time at Uber.
Mm-hmm.
I think people have become a lot more comfortable, especially like during the pandemic, with like a lot of like async conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people actually default to like, please no more meetings. So normally what I like to do is like I have like a bi-weekly stand-up with hiring leaders that I work with. And then we send out weekly reports, and then we could say, hey, are there specific things that we need to use this time for, or should we cancel? And so every single like time you actually get together, it shouldn't be the routine like, hey, let's all like look at the data together, let's all spend time like thinking about like these like very granular things. Like ideally it's all there, they've already kind of like come to their own conclusions, and then you can start to have like higher level conversations being like,
Yeah.
should we make changes to how we do interviews? Are we falling short of our goal? Why? Are we like not closing candidates like fast enough or at the rate that we think that we're capable of? And then you can start to talk about solutions to those problems as opposed to just like sitting in a room reviewing data together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you sort of assume assume familiarity with the problem by the time you get to the meeting. If there are no problems, we won't meet. If there are, then we're going to jump straight into sort of like jamming.
Yeah, I think like historically people were like sitting there like back at Uber, like we would have a regular sync. I'd sit down with my director that I was working with at the time, and we would like literally like review data together.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's how people work now.
Yeah.
Like I think it's like changed, which I prefer. So
like in that context though, I guess one of the things that you can lose maybe is the intangible, right? Like the fabric of your relationship, or just, you know, the quality of the non-work related interactions that actually help you work together too. Have you sort of stumbled across or designed any ways to sort of not just have it so that every time you get together, it's to sort of solve a very particular problem, but it's a bit more, I don't know, bit looser than that?
yeah, I mean, build personal relationships. I mean, sure, I think like it's hard again, like in this like remote world. Like, I mean, for example, like, I'm here in Colorado, you're in London, we're having this conversation. I think there's ways that you can do this in a more organic way and like build really good like partnerships with people. But I think it's just got to be like on the individual to do that. I don't think there's like some magic bullet. I think it's just like human interaction. I do think like through like making hiring decisions, like being there, like in the room when teams are talking about adding someone to their team, which is a very personal decision, and helping guide them through that. And sitting down with the hiring manager and coaching them through like, this is how you need to close this person. This is the conversation you need to have. Like that's a major like level of trust. And so if you're able to like do that, and that's like the best way for you to like build a good relationship. Now with like your directors and VPs that you work with and like higher level leaders where they're not like in the weeds every single day, it can be very, very different. But at least with like the people that are like in it like every single day, just like recruiters will be there organically, and those meetings need to happen.
Nice. One of the things we talked about sort of when we sort of got together and decided, hey, let's have this event, was your sort of distinction between trying to make recruiting much less of a reactive function and more of a proactive function. I know a lot of that for you, a lot of the roads lead to data, but tell us more. What role can data play in helping you sort of make that flip?
Well, I think I had alluded to this a little bit of like, take your data and try to project it forward using historical numbers. What do we expect of ourselves? And then act accordingly. I think you can also do some really interesting things with like understanding your team's actual needs and building out capacity models for your own team. So the nature of recruiting, right? Like oftentimes you get headcount goals a couple of weeks into a quarter for that quarter, and then you need to build out a recruiting capacity model to like understand, are we actually set up to like hit that goal? And then you need to like communicate that back, or then like hire onto your team or whatever. So the more that you can like push your teams to like understand the downstream effects of those workflows, the better. And that just comes through like consistent communication and understanding. But like then you could build into your capacity model, like, do I have a granular understanding of how all my recruiters, how all of my sourcers, how all of my coordinators, agencies we work with, like how all of them work and what we can expect from those outputs? And then you can start to like project forward. Okay, we need to like be hiring a sourcer on this quarter or this time, or recruiter here, and like this is how we're going to get to our hiring goal at the end of the year. So the more that you can build out these models and understand your team's workflows and like time spend, the more proactive you can be as a recruiting leader. I think also if you can train your recruiters, or even yourself, if you're like doing the work yourself, like, how do I get my hiring managers to think about not just the immediate need now, but like 6 months out, both in how they make individual hiring decisions and the makeup of their team and their organization, assuming it's going to scale, right? But like, how do we start to plan that out and like keep candidates warm, keep conversations active, even if people aren't looking right away? And so you can get a lot more flow when you're not trying to like generate a new pipeline from scratch every single time. So I think it goes down to like, from a leader level, working with, executives to like get you the numbers and do forward planning so you can actually like deliver on what they're asking, right? Not start like 3 months into the year for your annual goal. And I think like on the granular level, like working with your hiring managers, like individual hires, and think about the makeup of the team and how that's going to fit with like who you have on the bench, like ready to go in your pipeline. So those are kind of like the like table stakes of how I think about like proactive hiring. And I think like if you can achieve those things, you're like 90% of the way there.
Yeah.
You know, so
cool. Have you ever faced any like challenges in getting there, or just even optimizing these processes more generally? Like, what are those obstacles you often find maybe especially from like members of the hiring function, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason why engineers aren't just doing recruiting themselves is maybe sometimes they are, but like this is not their core workflow. It is not their core job. It is not their core expertise. Like people hire recruiters because they need help with recruiting and they need a subject matter expert like in that field. So, once you understand that and like you own that reality and you start to communicate that back to your hiring leaders, like, hey, these are the effects when we make late decisions. These are the effects when we like don't give competitive salaries or don't think about offers in certain ways. Like, when you're able to communicate outwards what to expect when decisions are made and help them understand how the function works, then they're better able to make effective decision making because it all comes around, right? Because when they don't have the people, they can't execute on their own goals. So then it just moves up in their priority list of like activities, right? So I think the biggest challenge that I faced with new recruiting leaders and building new rapport is like helping them understand and get them up to speed with like the necessities of the function and the downstream effects when things are late or decisions aren't made or expediency isn't like the priority, all sorts of things. So it's like a snowball effect. Like the more things happening, the bigger the problem gets, and it'll keep going. So I think that any new relationship, there's definitely like a calibration period.
Yeah,
for sure.
And like sounds like a lot of it comes down to communication essentially, and like knowing what to communicate about and making sure it's high signal that you're bringing to the hiring function and helping them understand why it's important. Are there sort of any tips you have for I guess communicating progress journey, but also if there's like even a particular, maybe let's bring it down to a particular requisition you're working on with an HM. What are your top tips for communicating with them in that situation?
Like on like individual like candidates or
let's imagine it's you're not hiring to bench, you're hiring a head of marketing, you're hiring one of them, you're working with a head of engineering, you're hiring one of them. How do you sort of, it's a key hire, the person who's making that hire is probably a VP or direct, VP level person. How do you sort of like make sure that communication is on point?
Yeah. I think ideally you've been working with them for a little while if you're about to make a key leadership hire, right? Like, so at YC, we would help startups with a lot of their like head of engineering, VP of engineering hires. And, we have specific points we recommend they do that. And whenever we're intaking one of these roles, like with the founder, with the CEO, we try to like point back like, hey, here's some key lessons, that other startups have learned. Have you talked to other founders that have made these hires? Like, do you understand what it's going to take to like do this properly? And then we also have our own opinion of like who they should hire based on their business, based on their market, whatever. And we spend a lot of time calibrating of like, how do you think about this candidate? How do you think about this candidate? Like tracking all of that data. And then we build out like very granular models of like target companies and all sorts of like systems that we can like get up to speed pretty quickly. All that being said, like I think like how you're able to like make these hires super effectively is like doing really great like upfront work to understand what they really need and have an informed opinion of what you think that hire should look like. And whenever you're reaching out and engaging with someone on the recruiting side, like I look at the profile and I'm like, do I think that this person would actually get the offer and like take it if we're to get on a call, and like every single time before you send a message, before you add them to like some reach out project, whatever, like that question is in like the top of your mind. And then that way, whenever you get into those conversations with your hiring manager of like, what do you think about this person? I got this feedback. You have like your own informed opinion. You can have a good back and forth if that's like the right person for the job. So I think that's where it just comes back to like being a really great extension of that hiring leader that you're working with. And and being able to like help guide them through a very critical thing, which is hiring a leader into their organization, which could either push them forward or set them back,
Yeah.
and especially in the stages of a startup could be make or break.
Yeah.
So
maybe more relevant to sort of like a few years back in your career, but have there ever been times when you've essentially needed help? Like, you didn't feel like you understood the role you were hiring for as fully as you thought you did, or whatever it might be, where you really needed help from the HM or the leadership, the engineering leader to sort of help you out and move the needle for you. Would love to hear one of those stories.
Yeah. So I'll talk about when we were at Uber. So Siadhal and I worked together back at Uber in Amsterdam. I was out there for about a year and a half. And when I joined, the organization was 30 engineers and they had one engineering manager. So one of the key things that we needed to do, poor Charles. So one of the things that we needed to do was grow out the whole like leadership team and layer. And part of that included hiring a head of engineering for the site. And I had never worked on that kind of a role before. I mean, hiring like a head of engineering for like a remote site is like not easy at all, especially when the market is small. So pretty much everyone you're hiring is going to have to relocate to that space. So I had to have a lot of conversations with the leadership back in San Francisco, with the executive recruiting team across Uber that was making these hires in different offices, but just couldn't support us at the time, of like, how do I have these conversations? Who am I looking for? How are we doing outreach and engagement? What are these people making? Like, how are we convincing them of the opportunity? Where are we going as an organization? And so it just took like probably 3 to 4 months longer than it should, because I had to ramp up on all that information. And I probably asked for that help like after I should have. So one of the things that I try to do is, if I really don't have an understanding of a role, or if I haven't worked on something before, like doing that information gathering up front and really like setting expectations of the challenges that I think we might have, so that like we can pull in the right people to get us to that result faster. We did make that hire. It took us like 6 or 7 months to do so, with another like 2 months for her to move out there. But we did it. But I think we could have done it a lot faster if we had like pulled in the right people sooner, for sure.
Yeah, nice, makes sense. I guess sort of like still talking on this, I guess calibration issue almost. There's the calibration side of it, where it's like this exotic role, like this one-off role, and therefore you're not really trying to build a machine around it. You're just trying to make sure you hire the best person possible. And then there's this sort of quality of calibration for your general pipeline, which is just a constant tax or a constant bonus you get if you're really tightly calibrated with the hiring function, I guess. When you think about those more sort of hiring a software engineer too, or whatever it might be, how do you make sure you or your team are calibrated on what good looks like in that sort of category of role?
Yeah, I actually think it's much easier to build the machine than it is to build the one-off. With the one-off, you need to have like a lot of conversations with your leadership team, with every single person that's doing the interview, every stakeholder, and you all need to have at least some high-level agreement around what that person needs to do and how you're interviewing, and then how that's going to tie back to like your opinion on performance. When you're hiring for engineering at scale, like, that's been done before by like a lot of people, and like you can build out interview questions with like rubrics of like, here's the questions we're going to ask, here's what good looks like, here's what bad looks like, and here's the in between, and like the gray area that we can all like interpret and like balance together. And so when you build these systems at scale, I think it's just about like documentation and just like basic calibration of like performance across different segments. And you can do a lot of the drag and drop from what other companies have done before. A lot of these questions are documented and online. And so if you're able to like take these questions, build out a basic set of expectations, and then have people like just go and execute on that, it's, then you've got a working recruiting machine, at least like with where like interviewing is concerned. So that's actually like much easier than like the one-off, which is like very subjective. In my opinion.
And in that relationship, though, getting the sort of the calibration of the hiring team has its challenges, but as you said, it can become a machine.
Yeah.
But the do you sort of have you recommend having just as clear of a rubric, I guess, for that recruiter screen, the recruiter who's working on the role as well, same thing, like very clear rubric?
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual, right? If you have a good senior recruiter, you should be able to just be like throw them on a problem and be like, look, you should be able to get in deep with your hiring manager, understand their individual needs and perform. But when you have junior recruiters or people that are like still new to an organization, maybe you can give them some basic framework to operate in. But ideally, like the recruiter like understands how to work with people, how to like tease out information, like how to read motivations, understand the organization they're working for. So I would actually recommend less process.
Yeah.
Until you start to get to a point where you have a junior team or you're scaling up and need some like consistency across like large organizations, then that's where that process makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I love that. I think I sometimes think it's a bit of a big ask sometimes for when you're recruiting to expect a hiring manager or whoever's sort of responsible for the hire to sort of enumerate everything they're looking for in a candidate, because the reality is, that you'll take a sort of well, if they have a spike here, maybe I'm okay with the weakness here or whatever it might be. It's much deeper than that. It's much more nuanced than that, which I think is then hard to sort of scale across of course all the interviewers. But I think it comes down to, as you said, like seeing the reps and sort of exposure to these problems.
Totally.
Have you ever had any issues where you found that an HM was being inconsistent in how they made their decisions? Like you did feel like you'd done this work to tease out this sort of, that you knew what they were looking for, you thought, but sometimes a candidate was a yes, other times they're a no. And to you, there was like no difference between these two. So, it seemed inconsistent.
Yeah. It just comes down to documentation, communication, note-taking, right? So when you intake a role, ideally you have a form, you fill that out like, hey, here's everything we're looking for. The must-haves, things that are nice to have, maybe like soft skills, like more like internal conversations you want to have around team makeup and the ideal type of profile. And then you have a straightforward like interview setup, like here's what we're screening for. And that way, when you go into the hiring decision room, you have all that information already and you can call out inconsistencies, ideally in private, sometimes in a more public setting when that's like the only way to do it. And if it keeps happening, then you need to have a sit down and be like, hey, look, we have talked about these things, and we've consistently made decisions that are not in line with what we are looking for. So we will not find the hire and make it if we keep changing. So like maybe we need to do a recalibration and just start over from scratch. When that starts to happen consistently, then you need to get into like, all right, maybe we need to like rope someone in, like, have other conversations with leadership around hiring and why this isn't working. But like I normally, if you assume good intent and you're like documenting all these things and able to like point back, people are generally reasonable and like be like, oh man, we're not gonna make this hire if we keep changing our yardstick. So
and just to be clear, when you say sort of maybe we need to call in other people, are you saying that maybe this hiring manager isn't sort of great at hiring and therefore shouldn't be doing hiring? Is that
sometimes they're new, sometimes they don't know. Maybe they're like scared to make the wrong decision. Maybe it's a high pressure environment, or a high chance of failure if they make the wrong call. And so they can start to like second guess themselves. So maybe if you're just like, hey, maybe we just need to like teach this person how to do it. Or maybe they just need a little bit more hand holding early on, or just a kick in the butt to like get them comfortable like making decisions, for sure.
I think the really powerful thing about what you were sharing earlier as well around the data is that becomes like a really sort of clear way to articulate why this is problematic. Of course, it's frustrating to be sourcing candidates, putting them through a process just to say no, even though they matched everything on. Of course, that's frustrating by itself. But when you can also articulate, and this means that actually our pass-through rates are now like this, which means we're not going to hire the team until 2 quarters later than we expected. Like this is a real strategic problem. It's not just a sort of
I think whenever, recruiters, like sometimes we can get so far away from like the business outcomes. And so like the more that you can understand, like, hey, if we don't hire these people, then X team isn't built, which means that X product isn't shipped and we like miss out on millions of dollars of revenue, like then it becomes way more house on fire. And like these decisions are like much more easy to like push forward and in either direction, by the way, right? Like, so.
Do you like it when it's house on fire, or do you prefer it not to be house on fire?
Sometimes. Sometimes, not consistently. But I do think that there is something to like everyone coming together, solving a problem, like, all hands on deck, like we are going to make this work and solve this together.
Yeah.
That sense of camaraderie I think you get in startups or in those like make or break times, and when you make it through those situations is really nice to look back on.
Yeah.
But yeah, not on a consistent basis.
No,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Couple of questions from my end to wrap up, and then we've got a few questions that have come through on the chat, so we'll cover those as well. Obviously, last few months, lots has changed in the world of definitely of tech hiring, where it's a little bit hiring to excess, and I think a lot more deliberate hiring. What's your advice for how teams should sort of adjust their approach to hiring given those current conditions?
Yeah, I think that's something I'm still figuring out and like thinking about, to be honest. I think when you look back at the last like 10, 15 years of recruiting, I think most of it has been, cheap money. Let's just grow super quickly. That's how we get successful. So I don't think most people, myself included, have been in this type of recruiting environment before. How I'm thinking about it with the teams that I'm working with is like trying to hire exceptional talent, trying to hire people that are going to stick with you for the long term, and also hiring for a lot of potential. Like how is someone going to be effective here for the next like 4 to 5 years, not just solving like the immediate problem. So I think when you take a longer term view to every hire you make, and when you really think about like the business impact and outcome of that, and be a little bit more deliberate with like headcount planning up front, I think these things would become a lot more important with every hiring decision and every like planning period than they ever have been before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that necessarily like answers the question, but I think like everything is just going to become much more under a microscope and like much more thoughtful.
Yeah, agreed. Last one from me, and hopefully we've already covered it. So I hope this won't be a surprise. But if there was like one piece of parting wisdom you'd give to folks, looking to foster those relationships, really strong relationship with their hiring manager, what would that sort of one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I think to start using data, operationalize how you use your systems, and then like just send that back to your teams. And that way you can have the hard conversations with yourself, with people that you're working with, and like what that's going to mean for the business. Recruiting is oftentimes the biggest expense for any company. And so it's a huge area of responsibility that recruiters have. So if we can become more data driven, I think that's a win for everybody. And it'll help you build the strongest relationships, not just with your direct hiring leaders, but even up to like C-suite.
Yeah, completely. Awesome. So we've got about 10 minutes left. That has flown by. I know we've got a few questions on the chat. So Stephanie, do you want to jump in and sort of pick a few of those, and Blake can take a run at them?
Yeah, sure. So the first question we have is from Mo, and he asks, what have been your biggest challenges when coaching hiring managers when you see challenges in their interview process, like with communications, negotiation, etc.?
Yeah. Well, sometimes they just ask questions that you legally can't ask. So that one's always a little tough, and you just have to be like, yo, you like actually can't say that. Like you just literally can't. Like that's not even like a conversation. And so that's always a tough one to have. I think the other one is teaching new hiring managers about the combination of selling effectively, and also interviewing, how to tease out like real information. And I think that's just like I don't think there's any substitute to like sitting down and just talking about it. Like each time, like, hey, how did this interview go? Like, what do you ask? Like, what's the structure of your conversation? Like, did you like glean this information? Did you get confidence on their ability to like collaborate with stakeholders? And if you're consistently getting like, oh, I don't know, or like surface level answers when you ask, like to or like try to dive in a little bit deeper, it's an opportunity for you to like teach, and for you to be that like subject matter expert, which by the way, they'll remember and they'll appreciate. And then that's how you get to like default yes. So these like early hiring managers will eventually become directors and VPs, and will like look to you for your advice and your opinion. So yeah, it's challenging, but I think the more that you can just get in there and have these conversations and talk about details, like the better.
Do you
Nice.
think there's
And then,
anything, sorry, Stephanie, do you think there's anything around literally sort of, when I think about sort of HMs that I've worked, recruiters that I've worked with in the past, sometimes you come out of an interview and there's like a first question, which is, hey, what did you think? And then there's like almost a series of questions that it sounds like what you're describing is something that's quite sort of, quite calibrated with the rubric. There's almost a set of questions you have, right? I think you mentioned, hey, what did you get? Did you get any signal on their ability to sort of work well with stakeholders? Like that's not a natural thing you're just going to ask unless you are familiar with what it was we said we were looking for from this person. So I wonder if there's like something, maybe it's like really intuitive to you that is, well, just actually ask them questions about the things that we said we were going to look for, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think you get that through reading the feedback, through like looking at these things more granularly. And like ideally as a recruiting leader, you're able to like teach your recruiters why that's important and enable them to be experts in their field and own their business line. But yeah, there's no way that you like get to that level of understanding without like being in the weeds with your hiring manager team. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, cool. I was just gonna say, kind of relatedly, I think we've covered a lot of these, but are there any other mistakes that you often see first-time hiring managers make?
Yeah. So there's sometimes they'll like, if interviewers are no's, they'll just assume that everything's bad, but it could be like a lot of like, well, I'm no because of like this like very like small reason that's actually not that important. So there's a particular story, we're hiring someone at Flexport. I'll leave like some details out, but like the hiring manager that I was working with was newer. And I remember that we were, the interview was half yes, half no. But when you looked at it, everyone was really impressed with this individual, but they were worried about their ability to like work super well in the cross-functional environment that Flexport was. Lots of business stakeholders, lots of them. And it's a very unique problem that we had. And the hiring manager was going to say a no. And I remember asking him, I was like, hey, like, have you thought about, is this an area that you can help them grow or like maybe own? It's at the end of the day, it's under your umbrella. Like, do you have the capacity to like teach this person how to do that more effectively and coach them up on our environment? Will that make them successful? And the answer was, well, yeah, actually it would. I was like, great, then I think you should make the hire. Like, it sounds like you're able to like cover that like weak point. So I think that's where like understanding your hiring manager, understanding your business line, understanding your candidate, what your teams actually need, you can guide them to more effective decision-making. Again, like if you're a recruiter, you are supposed to be the subject matter expert on recruiting, and it is your job to like know these things and figure it out.
Yeah, I love that, because that's when you start to sort of, that's when you're actually thinking about the team, right? You identified that this hiring manager actually was strong at this thing that this candidate wasn't. And so actually from a sort of team complexion perspective, it wasn't going to be super negative for the team if this person didn't have that trait, or they could, as long as they can be coached on it. Whereas, if you just look at sort of hey, we've got one JD, we're going to hire 100 people against that JD, and they all need to be the same. That's obviously not going to happen. And frankly, you probably wouldn't end up with the best team either, because it doesn't complement each other. Yeah, love that.
Definitely not.
Nice. Okay, the next question is about mishires. So what do you do in a situation where the team feels like there's been a mishire? Are there any processes or rituals that you have to reflect on what went wrong or how you might be able to avoid that moving forward?
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I think this is actually a problem, I think, in recruiting. We're so focused on the hire, and then HR is so focused on the management of that hire. And I don't think that recruiting and HR actually work super well together. And so that's something that I think that we as like an industry need to figure out. But if I'm thinking back to like my individual work, like when has there been a mishire? I think we have to ask ourselves, like, is this something that our current interview process could have caught? Is it something that we need to like build into our process, or are we okay that like we're not going to be 100% in our decision making? And oftentimes we end up in a place where it's probably not something we could have caught. Hiring is an inherently messy and faulty thing that we just try to do as least bad as possible. It's just the truth.
We should have called this that. How to do the least bad.
How to do your job as least bad as possible. No, it's true. So I think that, when I look at bad hires that I've made, it's either when I've been chasing a number and I've influenced someone in the wrong way, a hiring manager is desperate, and so they ignore signals, or we miss a signal, and then we got to think about how could we have caught that in our process, and do we want to optimize for that? Do we think it's a one-off, or do we think it's something that'll be more systemic if we continue? And then you can diagnose and like make decisions effectively. So mishires will happen. It's just a matter of like how you respond to think about it.
Totally. Cool. Okay, I think this is the last written question that we have, and this is about the kind of role of the interviewers themselves. How important do you think training interviewers is, and what have you seen in terms of interviewer training that's worked well at maybe some of the previous companies that you've worked at?
Yeah, I mean, interview training is integral, especially if you have figured out what works for you. Like, hey, this is how we do interviews. This is how we sell. This is what we're screening for. This is how we found that like successful hires are made at our organization. Then you need to have some basic stuff that like recruiting teaches, like this is how you interview, this is how you enter interview feedback, these are our SLAs and processes. Like that's all pretty standard, but I think most of the coaching needs to come from the hiring teams. And it could be the recruiter teaching the hiring manager, and the hiring manager then teaching their team, or a senior engineer on the team really owning that because they've done it elsewhere and are really experts in that space and are passionate about it. But it absolutely needs to be a process. I think having documentation really ramps that process up and makes it super efficient and effective. And yeah, it's like you can't build a scaled out interview process without training. You can't build consistency into a machine unless everyone is on the same page around expectations. So yeah, you need to do it.
I think the only scenario we've seen that where you talked a lot about how it needs to become the hiring managers, or essentially the people in the team, it's their problem too. I think that is that's the key, is when, the leaders of the function actually see the ability to clone themselves almost through these other set of interviews, or improve themselves, however you want to look at it, is really key. I think sometimes where we see failure cases, where we see companies that aren't recruiting at a really high level, it's where sort of no one has taken ownership of that bit. And it's almost the sort of the extreme version of what you described. I think Uber did a great job of really empowering people, also having high expectations around who you hired. But I think there's the bad version of that is where you empower people to do the hiring, but don't create those expectations. And okay, if this person over there doesn't care about their hiring, that's their problem. No, there's we centrally as an organization really care about this, so you better make sure you care about it too. It's really important. We sometimes see the case where that's not the case. No one is owning this. Recruiters want to get butts on seats. Hiring managers only care about their own people in their own team, and when they're interviewing on other people's panels, they care a little bit less. And I think that's the ruinous situation that you can sometimes get into, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nice. So we're at time. Blake, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It was a great chat. I really enjoyed it. Hope everyone in attendance did too. So Blake, thanks again for being so generous with your time. The recording will be sent around to folks in attendance, but also folks who registered but can make it very soon. So keep a watch out for that. We'd really appreciate any feedback on the event, maybe areas we didn't cover, ways we could improve it, recommendations on who to feature next. We're really honing in, as I said, on this touch point between recruiting and hiring managers. This is the thing that we sort of really care about and really keen to keep on exploring. So if there's anyone that comes to mind, feel free to let us know, and we'd love to feature them too. Thanks again all, and here's to running exceptional interviews. Cheers, Blake.
See ya.
Bye.